In the years leading up to World War II, the United States Army faced a critical problem. Its standard infantry rifle, the M1 1903 Springfield, was accurate and reliable, but it was a bolt-action design, slow to fire and increasingly outclassed by modern weapons in other armies. Soldiers had to manually cycle the bolt between shots, limiting the volume of fire that could be brought to bear in a firefight. This limitation became glaringly obvious as the specter of global conflict loomed, and military planners realized that future wars would demand rapid, sustained firepower from every rifleman. Amid this environment, a Canadian-born designer named John C. Garand worked tirelessly in Springfield, Massachusetts, perfecting a revolutionary concept, a semi-automatic rifle powerful enough to match or exceed the firepower of a machine gun in the hands of a trained infantryman. Garand envisioned a weapon that could fire as quickly as a shooter could pull the trigger, yet maintain accuracy at ranges that mattered in real combat. It was an audacious vision, one that required innovations in metallurgy, gas systems, and ammunition feeding mechanisms. Decades of experimentation had produced prototypes that were either too heavy, prone to jamming, or difficult to manufacture. But Garand persisted, driven by a singular belief that no ordinary soldier should be outgunned because of his weapon. By 1936, the U.S. Army officially adopted the rifle, a culmination of years of painstaking testing. The weapon was chambered in .30-06 Springfield, a powerful cartridge already standard in the American arsenal. Unlike the bolt-action rifles, the Garand could fire 8 rounds in rapid succession without any manual cycling, thanks to its en-bloc clip system. This simple but ingenious device allowed soldiers to reload swiftly under fire, delivering a volume of fire that astonished observers. Military theorists began to speculate about what this could mean in the next war. An entire infantry squad armed with semi-automatic rifles could unleash the firepower of a light machine gun, radically changing the dynamics of small unit combat. The first soldiers to train with the Garand quickly appreciated its potential. Accounts from early field exercises reveal astonishment at the ease with which soldiers could maintain suppressive fire while maneuvering. Officers noted that inexperienced riflemen could, with minimal training, keep up with veterans in rate of fire. This was unprecedented. Soldiers who had grown up on bolt-action rifles suddenly had a weapon that could match the intensity of machine gun fire without sacrificing mobility. Morale surged, and a quiet confidence spread through the ranks. They carried in their hands not just a rifle, but a transformative tool that could shape the outcome of a battle. Despite its promise, the Garand was not without its critics. Some officers worried about the rifle's gas system and potential for jamming in harsh environments. Manufacturing it at scale was a monumental challenge. The Great Depression had left defense budgets tight, and producing thousands of these rifles required coordination across multiple factories and suppliers. Ammunition production had to increase in parallel because a semi-automatic rifle consumed far more rounds than a bolt-action counterpart. The government invested heavily, knowing that the success of the United States in any future war might depend on every rifleman having access to this advanced firepower. By the outbreak of hostilities in December 1941, tens of thousands of Garands had been issued to frontline units. Soldiers were shipped to the Philippines, Alaska, and eventually the Pacific Islands, where the true test awaited. Japanese forces, accustomed to facing opponents armed largely with bolt-action rifles, were stunned when they encountered American infantry. The semi-automatic fire of the Garand allowed U.S. troops to respond with a volume and rhythm of fire that seemed unnatural, almost impossible for so few men. Reports from the front described the experience in disbelief. One Japanese officer reportedly asked how a single rifle could fire so rapidly, only to realize that every American rifleman had one. It was, in effect, a machine gun in the hands of every soldier.
The impact of the Garand went beyond its rate of fire. Soldiers could now engage multiple targets more effectively, lay down suppressive fire, and maneuver without pausing to manually cycle their rifles. In dense jungles, on coral beaches, and across open fields, the rifle's semi-automatic nature gave Americans a tactical edge that was impossible to ignore. Early battles revealed that Garand-armed units could hold positions, repel assaults, and maintain a tempo of combat that confounded Japanese tactics. Where once an infantry company might be outmatched in firepower, the Garand leveled the playing field and, in many cases, tilted it decisively in favor of the U.S. forces. Behind the scenes, Garand continued to refine his design. Each minor improvement in materials, springs, and gas ports increased reliability, and soldiers' feedback shaped production adjustments. By 1942, the rifle had achieved a balance of durability, accuracy, and firepower that made it arguably the most effective infantry weapon of the era. The M1 Garand was no longer just a rifle. It was a symbol of American ingenuity and industrial capability. Its presence on the battlefield forced enemies to rethink their tactics and, in some cases, scramble to develop semi-automatic designs of their own. For the soldiers carrying it, the Garand represented both confidence and lethal efficiency, a decisive advantage in a war that would demand every edge. As the first engagements began to unfold, the significance of this weapon became clear. The Garand allowed small units to fight with unprecedented intensity, ensuring that even a single squad could deliver the firepower of an entire platoon in previous conflicts. It changed training, tactics, and the psychology of combat. Soldiers knew they were equipped not only with a reliable tool, but with a transformative weapon that would shape every encounter. In the hands of determined troops, the M1 Garand would go on to rewrite the rules of infantry warfare, setting the stage for the dramatic confrontations that awaited across the Pacific.
December 1941 brought the first real test for the M1 Garand, and it came not in training exercises or controlled ranges, but under the harsh realities of war. As Japanese forces launched their invasion of the Philippines, American soldiers armed with the Garand faced a scenario that would challenge every lesson they had learned and every ounce of courage they possessed. For many, this was their first experience in combat, and the stakes could not have been higher. The Japanese landed with overwhelming speed and aggression, using a combination of infantry, artillery, and air power to push deep into Luzon and beyond. Against this onslaught, the Garand became more than just a rifle. It was a lifeline, a tool that could turn the tide in small, desperate skirmishes. Early encounters were chaotic. U.S. troops found themselves outnumbered and often outflanked, yet the semi-automatic fire of the Garand allowed small units to hold positions that would have been impossible with bolt-action rifles. Soldiers described the rifle's ability to unleash a continuous stream of fire without the pause of manual cycling as almost unnatural. Japanese infantry, advancing in tight formations accustomed to facing slower-firing opponents, were met with a wall of bullets that forced them to adapt on the spot. Entire platoons of Garand-equipped Americans could deliver the equivalent of a machine gun's output, covering each other as they maneuvered through jungle paths, rice paddies, and urban ruins. Reports from the front paint vivid pictures. In one engagement near Bataan, a small detachment of U.S. soldiers held a ridge against repeated Japanese assaults. With each wave, the Garand enabled defenders to target multiple attackers in succession, shifting from one to another with unbroken rhythm. Japanese soldiers were stunned, often pausing to take cover or retreat, unable to comprehend how so few men could maintain such relentless fire. Letters and diaries from the period describe both awe and fear at the weapon's effect. Some American riflemen recalled feeling almost guilty at the efficiency with which they could cut down the enemy, realizing that a single squad of Garand users could hold ground that would have required several times their number in previous wars. The Garand's impact extended beyond rate of fire.
Its reliability under harsh conditions, from the humidity of the jungle to the dust of open fields, meant soldiers could depend on it when it mattered most. Ammunition could be reloaded quickly with on-block clips, keeping the momentum of defense and counterattack alive. Units that had been trained extensively with the rifle could maneuver more freely, knowing their firepower could cover each other in moments of vulnerability. In contrast, Japanese troops, trained to exploit pauses between shots in bolt-action rifles, found themselves constantly suppressed, unable to close the distance effectively. The psychological effect was as profound as the tactical one. Many Japanese soldiers reportedly referred to the Garand as a walking machine gun, unable to reconcile the speed and consistency of its fire with their expectations of a standard infantry rifle. In reports captured by Allied forces, commanders noted how their men hesitated, confused by the volume of bullets they faced from American riflemen who seemed almost invincible at the squad level. For American troops, this awareness bred confidence. Soldiers trusted the Garand implicitly, understanding that their survival and effectiveness in battle were directly linked to the rifle's capabilities. There were, of course, challenges. Early Garands sometimes jammed, particularly when soldiers were forced to fire continuously under extreme conditions. Training helped mitigate these issues, but in the chaos of combat, even minor malfunctions could be deadly. Officers emphasized discipline and maintenance, ensuring that every soldier knew how to clear stoppages quickly and continue firing without hesitation. The combination of training, weapon design, and adaptability allowed units to extract maximum effect from the rifle, often compensating for numerical inferiority or logistical limitations. By mid-December, as the Japanese pushed towards Manila and the surrounding regions, the M1 Garand had proven its worth repeatedly. Skirmishes along roads, in villages, and atop hills demonstrated that American infantry could hold their own despite facing larger forces. The rifle did not guarantee victory, and many U.S. units still faced retreat or encirclement, but it fundamentally altered the dynamic of combat. Japanese tactics, previously based on rapid assaults and close-quarters engagements against bolt-action rifles, had to change. Soldiers had to break formation, use cover more extensively, and adapt to the possibility that every American rifleman could unleash the firepower of a machine gun. Even beyond immediate battlefield outcomes, the first encounters in the Philippines set a precedent for how the Garand would be perceived across the Pacific. Intelligence reports sent back to Japan described the weapon in almost mythical terms, noting its semi-automatic speed and reliability. By the time Guadalcanal and other island campaigns began, Japanese forces were already wary of what they called the American machine gun rifle, understanding that the semi-automatic capability could not be easily countered with their standard-issue Type 38 or Type 99 rifles. The M1 Garand had made its debut not as an experimental weapon, but as a decisive instrument of war, shaping both tactical thinking and the morale of friend and foe alike. As the fighting intensified, soldiers learned to exploit the rifle's strengths in ever more sophisticated ways. Defensive positions incorporated overlapping fields of fire. Teams coordinated their shooting to maximize suppression, and individual soldiers developed the confidence to engage multiple targets without hesitation. The Garand's presence transformed the battlefield, allowing even relatively inexperienced troops to contribute effectively to complex defensive strategies. In moments of desperation, it was often the difference between a unit holding a hill and being overrun. By the end of the month, the lessons learned in the Philippines would inform U.S. tactics for years to come, establishing the M1 Garand not only as a weapon of war, but as a symbol of American industrial ingenuity and tactical innovation. By the time American forces reached Guadalcanal in 1942, the M1 Garand had already proven itself in the Philippines, but the dense jungles, coral reefs, and unforgiving terrain of the Pacific Islands presented an entirely new challenge.
Japanese troops, seasoned from years of combat in China and early victories across Southeast Asia, had learned to rely on aggressive tactics, rapid assaults, and infiltration through terrain that seemed impassable. They expected to face familiar bolt-action rifles, predictable patterns of fire, and slow response from their opponents. What they encountered instead was something entirely different. The Garand, semi-automatic and reliable even under the harsh conditions of the tropics, transformed every encounter into a deadly game of cat and mouse. The initial landings at Guadalcanal were chaotic. American Marines disembarking onto beaches lined with jagged coral and thick vegetation quickly discovered the advantage the Garand offered. In open stretches, the rifle's rapid-fire capability allowed small squads to suppress enemy positions, keeping Japanese snipers and machine gunners pinned while teams maneuvered across exposed terrain. In the dense jungle, where visibility was limited and ambushes were common, the Garand's ability to fire successive rounds without manual cycling allowed defenders to respond instantly to sudden attacks, often neutralizing threats before they could fully emerge. For the Japanese, accustomed to exploiting slow-firing opponents, this was an unsettling and dangerous development. Accounts from Marines at Guadalcanal describe moments of near disbelief. In one skirmish along a narrow ridge, a squad of 8 American soldiers held off a Japanese company advancing in waves. The Garand's semi-automatic fire allowed each Marine to engage multiple attackers with precision and speed, while the rifle's en-bloc clips ensured sustained shooting without pause. Soldiers reported that the Japanese seemed to hesitate, unsure how to react to so much firepower from so few men. This hesitation, even brief, often proved decisive, buying time for reinforcements to arrive or for tactical repositioning. Across the island, similar stories unfolded. Small units with Garands could dominate key choke points, cover each other's advances, and maintain a rhythm of combat that left the enemy constantly off balance. The rifle also proved adaptable to a variety of combat scenarios. In close-quarters encounters within jungle trails or makeshift Japanese bunkers, Marines discovered that the Garand's semi-automatic action allowed rapid, controlled bursts that could clear rooms and trenches more efficiently than bolt-action rifles. In longer-range engagements, the rifle's accuracy ensured that multiple targets could be engaged without sacrificing precision. Commanders quickly recognized that this flexibility allowed for more aggressive and coordinated maneuvers, transforming small unit tactics. Defensive positions became layered and dynamic, with overlapping fields of fire that maximized the Garand's potential while minimizing vulnerability. The psychological impact on Japanese forces was profound. Soldiers who had fought against bolt-action rifles in China or the early Pacific campaigns often froze in the face of sustained semi-automatic fire. Officers reported that their troops had difficulty maintaining cohesion, as the Garand disrupted traditional assault formations and forced constant adaptation. Intelligence gathered after battles confirmed what Marines had observed firsthand. The Americans' ability to lay down continuous fire with precision meant that Japanese tactics, once reliable and predictable, were suddenly much less effective. The Garand had become a force multiplier, enhancing the effectiveness of every squad and influencing the outcomes of engagements that might otherwise have gone the other way. Despite its advantages, the Garand was not without challenges. The tropical climate of Guadalcanal, with relentless humidity, rain, and mud, tested the rifle's durability. Early models occasionally jammed under extreme conditions, and soldiers had to be vigilant in cleaning and maintaining their weapons. Ammunition supply lines were stretched across the ocean, making logistical support a constant concern. Still, the combination of training, discipline, and the rifle's robust design meant that American units could operate effectively even under adverse conditions. Veterans of the campaign often credited the Garand as a key factor in their survival and success, citing countless instances where its rate of fire turned the tide in otherwise dire situations. The strategic implications of the Garand's presence became evident as Guadalcanal's campaign progressed. Japanese commanders began to recognize that conventional frontal assaults, which had succeeded against slower-firing opponents, now carried unacceptable risks. They were forced to alter tactics, relying more heavily on infiltration, flanking, and night attacks in an attempt to counter the American semi-automatic firepower. Even then, small Garand-armed units could repel attacks with devastating effect, disrupting plans and forcing costly retreats. The weapon's influence extended beyond the battlefield. It shaped planning, morale, and expectations on both sides of the conflict. In many ways, the Garand leveled the playing field for American forces. Marines and soldiers, often outnumbered and facing determined, experienced Japanese troops, could engage with confidence. A single squad could hold strategic terrain, cover advancing units, or mount counterattacks with a rhythm of fire that Japanese soldiers could not easily match. Stories of heroism and tactical ingenuity frequently revolved around the rifle, an individual Marine holding a narrow pass, a platoon repelling repeated assaults on a ridge, or a small unit disrupting enemy supply lines, all made possible by the Garand's firepower. These accounts not only illustrate the rifle's tactical value, but also highlight its psychological and strategic impact on the campaign. By the end of the Guadalcanal campaign, the M1 Garand had earned a reputation that extended far beyond its technical specifications. It was no longer merely a semi-automatic rifle. It had become a symbol of American industrial ingenuity, tactical adaptability, and the psychological edge that could turn the tide in brutal, high-stakes combat. Japanese forces, facing repeated encounters with Garand-armed units, began to respect the rifle's capabilities and fear the Americans who wielded it. The lessons learned on Guadalcanal would inform every subsequent campaign across the Pacific, as the Garand continued to redefine what an infantryman could achieve in battle. As the campaign drew to a close, the combination of relentless training, rugged design, and semi-automatic firepower ensured that the Garand would remain a central tool in the Pacific theater. From dense jungles to open beaches, it enabled U.S. forces to fight more effectively, respond faster, and hold their ground against seasoned adversaries. The M1 Garand had proven itself not just in theory or training, but in the crucible of combat, setting the stage for the brutal island-hopping campaigns that lay ahead. Its presence would continue to shape battles, influence tactics, and challenge the Japanese at every turn, marking the rifle as one of the most consequential weapons of the Pacific War.
As the M1 Garand continued to dominate American infantry squads across the Pacific, Japanese military planners could not ignore the implications. Reports from the front lines described a weapon that allowed even small groups of American soldiers to deliver firepower equivalent to entire companies of bolt-action riflemen. For Japan, accustomed to relying on numerical superiority and aggressive tactics, this was a serious problem. The Japanese Army had invested heavily in the Type 38 and Type 99 rifles, both bolt-action designs, and neither could match the volume of fire or the suppressive capability of the Garand. Commanders and engineers alike realized that if they wanted to maintain parity, they would need to develop their own semi-automatic rifle fast. Work on what would become the Type 4 rifle began in the later years of the war, as Japanese designers studied captured American weapons and detailed reports of their performance. The goal was simple in theory: create a semi-automatic rifle that could fire repeatedly without manual cycling, chambered in the standard Japanese 7.7mm cartridge. In practice, it was far more complicated.
Japan's industrial capacity was already stretched thin by the war effort, with shortages of skilled labor, precision machinery, and high-quality steel. Designing a semi-automatic rifle was not merely a matter of copying the Garand. It required understanding the underlying engineering principles, particularly the gas-operated action and en bloc clip-feeding system, and adapting them to Japanese manufacturing capabilities. The Type 4 rifle, while an impressive feat of ingenuity given the circumstances, faced numerous hurdles. Early prototypes were heavy and prone to mechanical issues. Production was slow and inconsistent, and by the time it was ready for field testing, Japan was already losing ground across the Pacific. Only a few hundred Type 4 rifles were ever produced, far fewer than what was required to arm even a single division. For Japanese soldiers who did receive them, the rifles were often treated as experimental weapons, admired for their ambition, but recognized as unreliable compared to the Garand. Around the same time, Japanese engineers attempted another semi-automatic design, the Type 5 rifle, intended to improve upon the shortcomings of the Type 4. This model incorporated refinements to the gas system and bolt mechanism, aiming to increase reliability and ease of production. However, by the time it reached the testing phase, Japan was facing critical shortages in resources, from high-quality steel to precision tooling. The Type 5 project was ultimately curtailed by the collapse of supply lines and the mounting pressures of defensive campaigns across the Pacific. In the end, only a handful of these rifles were ever completed, and even fewer reached the front lines. Despite these setbacks, the story of Japan's attempts to replicate the Garand reveals the profound impact the American rifle had on the Pacific War. Commanders recognized that semi-automatic fire could no longer be ignored, and the urgency to match it shaped engineering priorities, resource allocation, and even tactical planning. The very existence of the M1 Garand forced Japan to confront a technological gap that could not easily be bridged. Soldiers trained on the Type 38 and Type 99 rifles were now outclassed in firepower, and even the experimental Type 4 and Type 5 designs arrived too late to make a difference. First-hand accounts from Japanese officers highlight the frustration and urgency generated by the Garand. Reports mention that assaults previously considered routine became much more hazardous, as every American rifleman could deliver sustained fire at ranges that had once been safe. Efforts to train troops to close distance quickly, to utilize cover, and to avoid open fields were direct responses to encounters with Garand-equipped soldiers. The psychological effect was also notable. Knowing that every American rifleman was effectively a small machine gun created hesitation, caution, and sometimes outright fear among attacking units. From a technical standpoint, the gap between the Garand and Japan's semi-automatic attempts illustrates a broader reality. Industrial capacity and precision manufacturing matter as much as design brilliance. While John Garand had years to refine and test his rifle under controlled conditions and benefit from American industrial scale, Japanese designers were racing against time, enemy advances, and severe material shortages. The Type 4 and Type 5 rifles, while innovative given the circumstances, were always fighting an uphill battle against both logistical constraints and the already proven M1 Garand in the hands of skilled American infantry. The broader strategic consequences were clear. The inability to match the Garand's firepower contributed to repeated failures in Japanese island campaigns, from Guadalcanal to the Solomons and beyond. Even elite troops could not overcome the semi-automatic advantage, and as American forces moved from island to island, the presence of Garand-armed riflemen shaped every engagement. Japanese planners realized that unless they could somehow replicate or counter this advantage, their defensive positions would become increasingly untenable.
The M1 Garand had not only transformed tactics and morale, but had created a technological gap that Japan could never fully close. In the end, the story of Japan's semi-automatic projects is a story of desperation, innovation under constraint, and the limits of wartime industrial capacity. The Type 4 and Type 5 rifles represented the ambition to meet the American advantage head-on, yet their limited numbers and technical issues rendered them largely symbolic rather than practical. Meanwhile, American forces continued to deploy the Garand in increasing numbers, each rifleman a small force multiplier, each engagement reinforcing the rifle's reputation. By the final stages of the war, it was clear that the M1 Garand had not only influenced battles, but had also forced the enemy into a reactive stance, scrambling to catch up while U.S. infantry continued to press the offensive with unprecedented firepower and confidence. The attempts to copy the Garand, though ultimately unsuccessful, underscore its significance. It was not just a rifle, it was a tactical and psychological weapon that shaped how the Pacific War was fought. The story of these Japanese semi-automatic projects serves as a testament to the Garand's impact, illustrating how a single innovation in design and manufacturing can ripple across battlefields, influence enemy strategy, and alter the course of history. The M1 Garand had set a standard that could not be matched, and every attempt to replicate it only highlighted how far ahead it was, solidifying its place as one of the most consequential weapons of World War II.
By the final stages of the Pacific War, the M1 Garand had become far more than just a rifle. It was a symbol of American ingenuity, industrial might, and the changing nature of infantry combat. Soldiers who carried it had witnessed firsthand how its semi-automatic firepower transformed engagements, from small skirmishes in the jungles of Guadalcanal to massive assaults across coral beaches and open fields. The rifle allowed a single soldier to deliver the firepower of a machine gun, fundamentally altering the balance between attacker and defender, and forcing the Japanese army to rethink long-established tactics. Every encounter reinforced the idea that firepower was no longer a matter of numbers alone. It was a matter of technology, training, and adaptability. The tactical advantages of the Garand extended beyond its rapid rate of fire. Its reliability in extreme conditions, humidity, sand, mud, and salt spray, gave American forces a confidence that was unmatched on the battlefield. Soldiers could engage targets repeatedly without fear of catastrophic malfunctions, and squads could coordinate suppressive fire in ways that were impossible with bolt-action rifles. In many cases, this allowed smaller units to hold terrain against numerically superior forces, giving commanders flexibility in planning offensives and defenses alike. The Garand was not just a tool for shooting, it was a force multiplier that enabled every squad to punch far above its weight. The psychological impact on both sides of the conflict was profound. American soldiers trusted the rifle implicitly, knowing that it gave them a tangible advantage over their opponents. Japanese soldiers, in contrast, learned to fear the semi-automatic firepower they encountered at every turn. Reports and diaries from the field describe Japanese units pausing under relentless Garand fire, reassessing their tactics, and sometimes breaking off assaults entirely. Where once soldiers might have relied on speed and aggressive maneuvers, they now faced an enemy that could unleash continuous, precise fire, reshaping the way engagements unfolded. The rifle created hesitation, disrupted formations, and forced a defensive mindset among units that previously prided themselves on offensive initiative. Beyond the immediate battlefield effects, the Garand influenced strategy at a higher level. Commanders had to account for the weapon's presence when planning landings, patrols, and assaults across the Pacific Islands. Japanese engineers attempted to develop their own semi-automatic rifles, the Type 4 and Type 5, but they arrived too late and in numbers too small to make a real difference. The technological gap created by the Garand ensured that American infantry maintained superiority, even in situations where supply lines were stretched and manpower was limited. The rifle became a decisive factor in the island-hopping campaigns, shaping not just skirmishes but the outcome of larger operations. The legacy of the Garand extended after the war as well. Its success influenced post-war infantry doctrine, emphasizing the importance of semi-automatic and automatic weapons in standard issue. Modern assault rifles and battle rifles can trace their lineage back to the principles demonstrated by the M1: high rate of fire, reliability under harsh conditions, and the ability to give every rifleman significant firepower. Veterans often remarked that the rifle changed the way they thought about combat, giving them the confidence to take decisive action while simultaneously challenging enemies who had grown accustomed to slower, more predictable firearms. Even in individual acts of heroism, the Garand played a central role. From Marines repelling waves of Japanese attackers on exposed ridges to infantrymen defending vital supply points, the rifle's semi-automatic capability allowed soldiers to engage multiple targets rapidly, cover their comrades, and sustain defensive positions against overwhelming odds. The combination of technology, training, and determination made the Garand more than just a weapon. It was a cornerstone of American battlefield success, a tool that turned ordinary soldiers into extraordinary combatants. By the end of the Pacific War, the impact of the M1 Garand was undeniable. It had altered tactics, morale, and strategy. Japanese forces had recognized its power too late, and their attempts to copy it were insufficient to match the advantages it provided. The rifle's presence had reshaped engagements from the jungles of Guadalcanal to the beaches of Iwo Jima, ensuring that American infantry could fight with confidence and effectiveness in even the most brutal conditions. Its legacy would endure, influencing both military thinking and weapons design for generations. In retrospect, the M1 Garand stands as one of the most consequential weapons of the Second World War. It did not single-handedly win battles, but it multiplied the effectiveness of every soldier who carried it, shifted the balance of engagements across the Pacific, and forced enemies to reconsider their tactics in the face of unprecedented firepower. Its story is one of innovation, industrial capability, and battlefield transformation, a reminder that in war, the combination of technology and human skill can decisively shape the course of history. Every encounter, every skirmish, and every campaign that involved the M1 Garand helped define the outcome of the Pacific War, leaving a legacy that endures in military history and in the evolution of infantry weapons to this day.